The green glow painted his face in sickly hues, a spectral mask in the hushed darkness. It was the color of deep-sea things, of bioluminescent lures and unseen predators. Around him, the radar room hummed, a low thrum that vibrated in his bones, a constant reminder that they were the ship's eyes, staring into the inky blackness that surrounded them. Each blip on the screen was a potential threat, a question mark hanging in the balance between peace and oblivion. He adjusted his headset, the faint static a whisper in his ear, and focused, trying to discern the subtle differences between a fishing trawler and something far more sinister. The air hung thick with anticipation, a tension so palpable it felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. He could taste it, metallic and sharp, the residue of adrenaline already starting to flood his system. Outside, the waves crashed against the hull, a rhythmic pulse that echoed the frantic beat of his heart. He traced a finger across the cool surface of the radar console, the smooth metal a stark contrast to the sweat slicking his palm. The screen was a canvas of swirling green, a chaotic dance of light and shadow. Each sweep of the radar arm felt like a heartbeat, a desperate plea to the void for clarity, for some sign that they were alone. But they never were. Out there, beyond the reach of human eyes, the enemy lurked, a phantom presence that haunted their every waking moment. He imagined them, sitting in their own darkened rooms, staring at their own screens, their fingers poised over the same buttons, their hearts pounding with the same primal fear. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, played out on the vast and unforgiving stage of the open ocean. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to block out the noise, the tension, the overwhelming sense of responsibility. He just wanted to be home. He inhaled deeply, the recycled air heavy with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. It was a smell he had come to associate with vigilance, with the constant, gnawing awareness that something terrible could happen at any moment. He opened his eyes and stared back at the screen, his gaze unwavering, his resolve hardening. He was the watchman, the sentinel, the guardian of the ship and everyone on board. He would not falter. He would not fail. He would see them coming, even if it was the last thing he ever did. The memory hit him like a rogue wave, a sudden and unexpected surge of emotion that threatened to drown him. He was 8 years old, sitting on his grandfather's knee, listening to stories of the sea. His grandfather, a grizzled old sailor with eyes the color of the deep ocean, had spent his entire life on the water, braving storms and dodging enemy fire. He had seen things that would haunt a lesser man, but he always spoke of the sea with a reverence, a love that bordered on obsession. He told stories of mythical creatures and faraway lands, of daring rescues and tragic losses. He painted a picture of the ocean as a living, breathing thing, a force of nature both beautiful and terrifying. He remembered the smell of his grandfather's pipe tobacco, a sweet, earthy aroma that clung to his clothes and permeated his skin. It was the smell of adventure, of faraway places, of a life lived on the edge. He remembered the feel of his grandfather's calloused hand on his shoulder, the weight of it both comforting and reassuring. He remembered the look in his grandfather's eyes, a mixture of pride and sadness, of longing and regret. His grandfather had wanted him to follow in his footsteps, to embrace the life of a sailor, to experience the freedom and the danger of the open ocean. But his mother had forbidden it, fearing for his safety, wanting him to have a more stable and secure life. He had resented her for it at the time, but now, years later, he understood. The sea was a harsh mistress, and it demanded a high price from those who dared to venture onto her domain. He had joined the Navy anyway, a compromise of sorts. He wouldn't be on deck, exposed to the elements, but he would still be a part of the maritime world, a guardian of the seas. He had chosen the radar room, drawn to the technology, to the power of seeing what others could not. It was a way of honoring his grandfather's legacy, of connecting with the sea in his own way. He often wondered what his grandfather would think of him now, sitting in this darkened room, staring at a screen, hunting for enemies. Would he be proud? Disappointed? He knew one thing for sure. His grandfather would understand the weight of responsibility he carried, the burden of knowing that lives depended on his vigilance. He closed his eyes again, picturing his grandfather's face, his weathered smile, his knowing gaze. He could almost hear his voice, a low rumble that echoed in his memory. "Watch the horizon, lad! Always watch the horizon!" The blips pulsed, mocking in their unwavering rhythm. Each one represented a life, a vessel, a potential threat. We were the unseen eyes, the silent sentinels, but that night, the silence was about to shatter. Commander Ito's face, usually a mask of calm authority, was etched with a barely perceptible tremor. He knew, we all knew, this wasn't a drill. The order came down, clipped and devoid of emotion. "Prepare for engagement. Target designated, hostile destroyer, bearing 270, range 80 nautical miles." The air in the radar room thickened, heavy with unspoken dread. The young ensign beside me, barely out of the academy, swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he gripped his console. I placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture more for my own reassurance than his. "Stay sharp, son. Just follow procedure." Then, the klaxon. A shrill, ear-splitting wail that ripped through the ship, tearing apart the fragile veneer of calm. It was the sound of war, distilled into a single, terrifying note. The red battle lights flickered to life, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the faces of the crew. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of fear. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Reports flooded in, commands were barked, and the radar screen became a chaotic dance of blips and vectors. We tracked the enemy destroyer as it closed the distance, its speed relentless, its intentions unknown. The tension in the room was palpable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on us all. Commander Ito, his voice now a steel-edged rasp, guided us through the engagement, his every word precise and unwavering. He was the anchor in the storm, the unwavering center around which we all revolved. Then, the first strike. A shudder ran through the ship, a violent tremor that shook us to our core. The lights flickered again, and for a terrifying moment, the radar screen went blank. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by a frantic scramble to restore the system. When the screen flickered back to life, the enemy destroyer was still there, its blip now accompanied by a series of smaller, fainter echoes, the return fire. The battle raged on, a desperate dance of destruction and survival. Missiles streaked across the sky, explosions rocked the ship, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal. We were locked in a deadly embrace, two warships locked in a desperate struggle for supremacy. And then it happened. A direct hit. A blinding flash, followed by an earth-shattering explosion that ripped through the ship. The radar room buckled, sending consoles flying and throwing us all to the ground. The lights went out, plunging us into darkness. And then silence. A deafening, terrifying silence. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of dripping water. The radar room was in ruins, a twisted wreckage of metal and wires. Men lay scattered around me, some groaning, some silent. The young ensign beside me was slumped against his console, his eyes wide and unseeing. I crawled towards him, my body screaming in protest. I reached for his pulse, but there was nothing. He was gone. Just like that. A life extinguished in the blink of an eye. And I, the silent sentinel, had been powerless to stop it. Years have passed since that night. The war is over, and the world has moved on. But the radar room still haunts me. I see it in my dreams, the flickering lights, the frantic activity, the young ensign's face. I smell the smoke, hear the explosions, and feel the weight of his lifeless body in my arms. They call me a hero. They pin medals on my chest and tell me I served my country with honor. But all I feel is guilt. Guilt for surviving when so many others didn't. Guilt for not being able to save the young ensign. Guilt for the lives we took that night, the families we shattered. I tried to forget, to bury the memories deep inside. I drank, I gambled, I chased women, anything to numb the pain. But it was no use. The radar room was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to drag me back into the darkness. Now I live a solitary life. I avoid crowds, loud noises, and anything that might trigger a flashback. I spend my days fishing, watching the waves crash against the shore, listening to the cries of the gulls. It's a quiet life, a peaceful life, but it's not a happy one. The war took something from me that I can never get back. Sometimes I visit the war memorial. I stand before the wall of names, tracing my fingers over the etched letters. I see the young ensign's name there, alongside the names of so many others. And I whisper a silent prayer, a plea for forgiveness, a promise to never forget. The radar room may be gone, but the scars remain. Etched deep in my soul, a constant reminder of the night we watched the enemy, and lost a part of ourselves in the process. I am forever tethered to that moment, a silent observer of a battle that never truly ends. Block 5. The silence in the radar room was absolute, heavier than any depth charge. Only the hum of the machines dared to break it, a constant, unwavering drone that now felt like a mocking reminder of their failure. Commander Ito stood rigid, the ghost of the setting sun painting long shadows across his face, etching deeper the lines of fatigue and despair. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were now clouded with a pain that resonated throughout the room. "Damage report," he finally rasped, his voice barely audible. The response was a litany of devastation: crippled engines, breached hull, casualties mounting. But the words barely registered. Ito was already lost in the vortex of his own regret. He saw Kenji's face, young and eager, full of unwavering faith. He heard his laughter echoing in the narrow corridors of the ship. He felt the weight of his responsibility, the crushing burden of command that had led them all to this watery grave. Then, a flicker on the radar screen. A single blip, small and insignificant, yet it pulsed with an undeniable signal. Hope, fragile as a newborn bird, fluttered in Ito's chest. "Report!" he barked, the command snapping like a whip. "Unidentified vessel, Commander. Bearing 090. Closing fast." Ito leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen. The blip grew larger, more defined. It wasn't one of theirs. It was American. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Relief, tinged with bitterness. Salvation, bought with defeat. He had failed his mission, failed his emperor, failed his crew. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could still save some of them. He turned to his remaining officers, their faces etched with exhaustion and resignation. "Prepare to be boarded," he ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "All remaining crew are to assemble on the main deck. There will be no resistance." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Resistance was ingrained in their very being, a code they had lived and breathed. But Ito's gaze was unwavering, his authority absolute. They knew in that moment that the battle was over. As the American vessel drew closer, Ito walked out onto the bridge, the wind whipping at his face. The sky was a canvas of bruised purple and orange, a final, majestic farewell. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he saw sakura blossoms falling, heard the gentle murmur of the temple bells, felt the warmth of his wife's hand in his. Then, he opened his eyes and faced his fate. The American sailors swarmed onto the deck, their faces grim and determined. An officer approached Ito, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Commander," the American said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We're here to help." Ito looked at the young man, his eyes filled with a weariness that transcended language. He saw not an enemy, but a fellow human being, caught in the same brutal machinery of war. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, the word barely audible above the wind. As the survivors were led away, Ito remained on the bridge, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean in hues of blood orange and fading gold. He thought of Kenji, of his dreams and his laughter. He thought of his wife, waiting patiently for his return. He thought of his country, forever changed by the ravages of war. He knew that the world would never be the same. But as he looked out at the vast, unforgiving ocean, he also knew that even in the darkest of nights, there was always a glimmer of hope. A chance for redemption. A promise of a new dawn. The war was over for him, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of a new peace. The radar screen, now dark and silent, reflected the fading light, a mirror to a world forever altered, and the heavy, unspoken weight of a future yet to be written.